Basically, the motto of today's story is that we care too much about things that really don't matter. And to express this belief and frame my argument are two stories, one of celebrity culture and the other about a book that I didn't enjoy a decade ago. So let's start first with the book that I didn't enjoy a decade ago. It was around this time of year because it was my birthday. Someone who I was working with very kindly gave me a book for my birthday. And it just so happened to be this book that they had been talking a lot about. It was quite a niche thing. It's not a large, marketable book in any shape or form. It was one of those that wasn't readily available on the shelf, so I hadn't picked it up by myself. So I read this book, and it was an interesting book, but it wasn't really my cup of tea. It was kind of a little bit I read it and I didn't dislike it, but I didn't really care for it either. So I read it over a day, and then when I came in for my next shift, my colleague asked me how I liked the book, and I just replied going, yes, it was okay. It's not really my cup of tea, but I enjoyed it. Little did I know that that sentence would basically be the end of our friendship. My colleague was then quite cold towards me from that day onwards and was very sad for the rest of the day. They wouldn't really talk with me, they wouldn't engage with me, and this went on for several days until their partner contacted me. Now, their partner and I had been friends already, so when they texted me, I just thought we were having a conversation, and they told me that their partner was incredibly upset at my review of their favourite book. This took me back. I didn't think I'd said anything horrific about the book. It was just a book that I didn't really care for, but it was suddenly not something that I had been slagging off, saying it was an awful book, and I had no idea why they liked the book so much. It was just one that didn't really appeal to me. But then their partner told me that because they were so distraught at how I'd responded to one of their favourite books, they were really mortally offended. And their partner asked me if I could reread the book again to give it a second go, just so their partner would feel happier and go forward less upset. And whilst I really enjoyed and liked this colleague, I wasn't going to reread a book and change my opinion because their feelings were hurt. My colleague had not written this book. My colleague had no personal investment in this book. It wasn't a family member's book. It wasn't their mother's book. It was just a random book. But I realized then that there is a strange connection between our obsession with people liking what we like, and then it goes into a separate exploration of our feelings of needing to be mirrored by those that we like, and if we are not mirrored, it is a mortal wound. Which leads me on to celebrity culture discussions. Now, I hate how much I know about celebrity culture based on just how prevalent it is. I swear it has gotten worse over the years. Over the past couple of years, I've learned a load of information about things that I wish I'd never learned about, purely because celebrity culture has woven its way into all types of discussions, from podcasts to even video essays that I love watching. And I suppose it's because it's more of a popular topic. So it's more clickable, and people that I love who write incredible video essays about LGBTQ rights or even, literature reviews tend to discuss in depth celebrity culture topics to relate to their audience. And as such, I then passively consume a lot of celebrity culture through video essays and podcasts that I thought were well constructed. But I realized that this intellectualization of celebrity culture, whilst can be very interesting and entertaining, is not something I really want to partake in. And that's not something that's me saying off. I just wish I hadn't learned a lot of information. Why do I know about Ariana Grande? Why do I know about a poster from Wicked with red lipstick being changed? And why do I know so much about Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift? These are people that I had no interest in themselves. They're not people I listen to. They're not people that I engage with. And that includes another topic about a singer called Chappell Roan. Now, again, I'm not going to iterate the things that happened here, but what's fascinating is, whilst I learned about this circumstance, it took me right back to 10 years ago when I had an incident with my book selling colleague and not liking the book that they liked. But speaking of passivity, I think it's probably an interesting point now to talk about how passive reading and passive consumption doesn't really move us forward in life, and that's where today's sponsorship comes in, which is brilliant. When it comes to learning and advancing ourselves, being proactive and hands-on is far more effective at getting us forward in life, whether that's adopting a skill or a habit. And Brilliant is where you can learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in math, data analysis, programming, and AI. Hands-on learning is 6 times more effective than watching lectures or videos, which is why lessons on Brilliant are filled with hands-on problem solving that lets you play with concepts and allows you to build your critical thinking skills and build real knowledge in just a few minutes a day, which is far more fulfilling than mindless scrolling. Brilliant recently launched a ton of new content in data, all of which uses real-world data, such as, rental values of Airbnbs going viral on X or topping the charts on Spotify, to train you to see trends and make better informed decisions. To explore everything that Brilliant has to offer, then you should go to brilliant.org/self-help shelf for a free 30-day trial and then 20% off an annual subscription. Chapel Roan has been discussed in depth, along with many other celebrities, when it comes to video essays about commercialization and capitalization of fame and the consequences of that, and the entitlement, and how basically the commodification of human beings has made people feel more entitled to them. And I'm not going to iterate those processes, because whilst it's an interesting argument, and I'm not saying it doesn't apply here, I noticed something a bit more insidious that reflects to the self and the ego, and really a complex narcissistic tendency that we have in a desire to be mirrored by others that we like. I think it was summed up quite recently when I saw someone tweet out a large thread of someone saying that they were very happy that they removed all of Chapel Roan's music from their Spotify playlist because they were so disappointed and devastated by them. And I thought to myself, what has this person done? And then later I found out that it was purely because they didn't openly endorse a candidate for the presidential election. And that was the devastation amongst their audience members, which led me to thinking back to this incident with the bookseller, because I realized the fundamental nature of these two incidents are kind of interconnected. What we're not talking about here entirely is purely a capitalistic commodification of celebrity culture, but also something more sinister within ourselves, and that is this narcissistic tendency and desire to want to be mirrored back by those that we like. So my colleague had no personal investment in the book that they had given me for my birthday. I hadn't insulted the book, but they were offended and never really talked to me properly after that because they weren't mirrored by me. They wanted some kind of mirror validation that this book was amazing. They wanted this kind of certification and this reassurance that their taste in literature was incredible, and that was going to be sought by external validation, which was me. They wanted to be mirrored by me, and because I didn't mirror it back, they started having self-doubts about their own taste in literature, which is atrocious because the person was far more intelligent than I was, they were far more accomplished than I was, and they were much older than I was. They were more well-read. It was no reflection. Someone in their 30s should be upset by a 22-year-old then not liking a book that they liked. It seemed like a really strange dichotomy. But the same principle applies to this kind of vicious uprising when it comes to celebrity culture, when a stranger, effectively, that someone likes, does not say or act in a way that the person who is offended would have. So in this case, the individualization of this pop star who didn't really want to get involved in discussing their political opinions, because at the end of the day, they are a pop star, and rightfully so, they were critical of both sides, and that is something that is very warranted. But the people who were mortally offended by this pop star taking the position were those who wanted the pop star to say and do exactly as they would have done in her space, in her position, because they wanted to be mirrored by the celebrity that they admired, because other elements of her character, clearly, they did see themselves in. Maybe it was the way that she dressed, maybe it was her interests and her passions, maybe even in her lyrics. People saw themselves in Chapel Roan, and when they suddenly didn't see themselves perfectly mirrored, even though their argument and everything about them does align with them. It's not like Chapel Roan came out as a massive Trump supporter. They did say that they were going to vote for Kamala Harris, despite also saying that there's a lot of problems that they have with that vote, which is a completely valid criticism because, yes, that's how politics works. But that wasn't good enough because people wanted this perfect mirroring of themselves. And that's where we have a problem. And it seems more insidious and aggressively violent in nature when it comes to people online, and it spreads. It is not just a celebrity culture, it is amongst all people. You have a right to feel a little disappointed in real life world situations when someone you know or are speaking to doesn't agree with you entirely in something. So say you were on a date with someone and you realize that this person really likes a podcaster that you really despise because you realize that this podcaster leans to a political area which you do not align with. But you realize on this date that this person doesn't lean that way, and you can be a little bit uncomfortable with that and realize you probably aren't going to get along and potentially end the conversation there and end the date and the dating process. Similarly, if you're in a work environment and you learn that your manager votes a particular way, which happened to me in the past, I found out one of the managers I worked for had voted for Brexit and UKIP, which was an extreme different way of how I work. And you're sitting in a situation where you go, I have to have a relationship with a person that I'm now a little bit wary of, that we may have big differences of opinion on socio-political matters. And it's perfectly natural to feel uncomfortable in those situations. And the same goes when it applies for more serious topics, when it comes to family members and the way you align with sexuality, with wants, with human rights, etc. Those kind of conflicts are natural. But the way people reply online to much lesser things demonstrates that we care a little bit too much about things that really don't matter. So even when it comes to, say, Chapel Roan, who is someone who does clearly tend to lean more politically left from what I can see of their nature, particularly when it comes to LGBTQ rights and women's rights, because they didn't align perfectly and mirror exactly along the line of, even if they leant left, people on the left were still offended by Chapel Roan's position because it wasn't perfectly in line with theirs. And I think people have a habit, and a bad one of that online, in looking for complete and utter alignment with those that they follow online, which isn't possible. And the grace is given in more human circumstances in the real life. You know that your managers will not probably align with you on absolutely everything, and yet you accept that. However, when you admire someone or you follow someone and you're potentially financially invested in that person, say by buying their products or going to their gigs or whatnot, people demand in some way that that person mirrors them entirely down to a T, and they don't see a problem with that. Yet in any other circumstances, when we apply that to a real world context, you would see that as an abusive circumstance. So say, for example, a child being raised up by their parent, and their parent dislikes their child and verbally abuses them, denies them of any kind of love and affection, rejects them entirely because they do not align with them. They may not look how the parent wanted them to look. They may not have studied a particular subject that the parent wanted to study, or they may have a sexuality that the parent did not want them to have because the parent had other plans for their child. They wanted their child to either ideally live the life that they did not live, so they want them to go to that university and study law rather than go down the economics route or go down the artist route, or they wanted their child to behave in a heterosexual normality, in which we grant them grandchildren, or they wanted their child to look a particular way. They wanted their child to be blonde and tanned and girly, or they wanted their child to be masculine and like sports. But suddenly their child who isn't masculine and doesn't really like sports likes playing with dolls and making dresses for a living instead. And the parent then responds to that circumstance as rejecting the child, feeling mortally offended that their child does not live up to their expectations, and they abuse them, berate them, or completely reject them. Now, we know in that circumstance, the family's dynamic, that is an abusive family member. That parent does not love them unconditionally, and it is incredibly abusive to treat someone who does not align with you because you either don't agree with their lifestyle, you don't like their lifestyle, or you don't like their choices. And yet when it comes to the internet culture, and it's not just celebrity but influencers as well, people are very happy to apply that same abusive dynamic that a parent-child would have onto basically absolutely everyone on the internet. And that ease to endorse this kind of abusive behavior makes it really scary to exist online. People are not perfect. There are huge things happening on in the world, but even if someone disagrees with you on that position, arguing with that person and resenting them and hating them and rejecting them in some way doesn't really move the needle for the cause that you care about. What does move the needle for the cause that you care about is actually investing in the cause that you care about, which takes me back to that very famous, poignant saying, promote what you love, don't bash what you hate. And this weird parasocial relationship between just strangers online, not even people that you admire. If you see a comment or a thread that you disagree with online, you are more likely to have an enraged reaction that someone doesn't align with you, rather than just moving on and ignoring it. You feel personally offended that someone has a complete different take on, say, like Taylor Swift, which is why people can't criticize Taylor Swift without Taylor Swift fans bombarding that person and harassing them off the internet. It's almost like the personification of the echo chamber. We want people to always be on our side. We want people to always agree with us. And even if someone largely agrees with you and then may deviate ever so slightly on the minute details, and you reject that person entirely and do not want to be associated with that person and everything about them, then that shows an instability in one's nature as a human being, and also a lack of empathy for the difference of people. It's quite interesting when people are more progressive, acting that way, not allowing for the nuance of human takes, not allowing to respect other people's different opinions and actually hear what they're saying, that it becomes like a divided nation. And the idea that I'm scared to speak unscripted as I have done today is because that kind of rubbing of the threads. People will happily rub at a tapestry and try and look for those loose threads, try and look for those threads that poke out a little bit more. And once they see that little thread poking out, they will pull it and pull it and pull it until it unravels. And we live in a culture where that has become the norm, not only from like going through people's problematic old tweets and looking through that and digging up the past, but people just have this obsession with trying to find the looseness and break connection that we have with one another. They are looking for perfection amongst imperfect people, and they will amplify any imperfections, even if they actually agree with the person in total. And yes, I know people will say, well, they have great power, so therefore their opinions matter, but they wouldn't care for that to be announced if, say, Chapel Roan came out as a Trump supporter. If anything, not only would they be angry at her for not actually having the same political opinions as them, but they would start spouting things off. It was dangerous for her to announce that political stance on mass scale. That was dangerous. She shouldn't have said anything. So people can't win. People would rather, famous people with a lot of power, say, shut up about incidents that they know can shake the ground against their favour, but they also want them to speak out if it is in their favour. It's a battle that people can't win, and all on the microcosmic scale, all the way down to when you're searching the comment section of a Twitter thread and you see someone you disagree with and become insanely angry, rather than just moving on, because engaging with someone like that, it's their right technically to have that opinion. They are not going to be convinced by you, I can guarantee it. So that's my weird talk about the weird celebrity culture that we live in. I hope you don't mind me going off script here. It's just like been plaguing my mind, and I've been scared to talk about it because, again, it's an opinion and people hate opinions online, but I'm just going to pop it out there. Thank you so much for your patience with me. I've been working on a lot of scripts for this channel and also for the podcast, but in my head, I've been a bit scared. This channel is quite a scary place to be because people are quite opinionated, and again, for this very context, that I haven't published or recorded any of them for this very reason. So now this one's out the way, hopefully I can go forward and just put a brave face on and prepare myself. But I know that what really I'm scared of is people lacking empathy and lacking that nuanced take of things, and just realizing that some people disagree and that's it. It's not that deep. There are bigger things to care in the world. One person changing their opinion slightly from your own and not mirroring you back perfectly or speaking directly to you does not make the world a worse place. That would be a very narcissistic take on the world around you, to look for yourself in other people. You can look for inspiration and see yourself in other people, but you should be looking for yourself entirely in that person and hoping that you could copy and paste yourself into every single moral and socio-political belief that that person has. Because you're going to be sorely disappointed. It doesn't exist. You exist. You may find very much like-minded people. Unless you create space for nuance in the humanity of people, you're going to be incredibly upset and frustrated and angry for most of your life. And I don't want people to live that life, because that perpetuates itself into society and then affects real life relationships. So the next time you see someone like a celebrity or someone you admire who doesn't exactly do as you do, maybe they don't say or act in the way that you would have had it been you talking on that side of the camera, maybe step back and realize that actually that's their thing. That's how they are, but it doesn't change who you are, and you don't need the validation of a famous person to believe in your beliefs and be proud of them. Unless obviously we're talking about criminal activity or hateful activity or bigoted activity, then obviously we have a little bit more of a circumstance there. And this is more of a personal note for me to end the video on. If you have any recommendations for podcasts or channels that don't engage too much with celebrity culture, because I really don't want to know much about it, please give your suggestions down below. And until next time, I'll see you soon for another video. And remember, books save lives. So keep reading.